Today we have a 2025 Genesis GV80. In this video, I'll talk about what the GV80 is, how I feel about the interior space, and what it's like to drive it. Now, if you're here, you're probably in the market for a luxury midsize SUV, and you might have seen a Bentley-looking like SUV from a brand called Genesis. Well, here it is, the Genesis GV80. Now, let me tell you something, this thing definitely has presence, but it doesn't have the easiest job on earth, and no, it doesn't compete with Bentley, but has some serious rivals. We have an Audi Q7, BMW X5, Mercedes GLE, or a Volvo XC90, so some serious players. Now, since it's the first time we're covering the GV80 on the channel, let's talk about what this thing is. 2025 model year brings some styling updates, but the rest remain the same. The GV80 comes in two variants, classic SUV and an SUV coupe, and sits on a rear-wheel drive platform. Chassis-wise, we get a multi-link suspension front and back. Passive, non-adaptive dampers are standard, and as an option, you can get adaptive dampers, which, besides the ability to go stiffer or softer, can prepare the chassis for impacts ahead of you using data from GPS and a camera that scans the road. No air suspension option here, unlike in the European rivals. We have three engine options, a 2.5-liter turbo 4-cylinder making 300 horsepower, a 375 horsepower 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6 that we have in our tester, and the coupe variant only gets an e-supercharged 409 horsepower mild hybrid using that twin-turbo V6. Note, this is only reserved to the coupe variant. An 8-speed automatic transmission is your only option, as is a rear-biased all-wheel drive system, and the V6 model gets an eLSD as standard. Now, before we talk what it's like to drive the Genesis GV80, let's take a look inside and talk about the interior space. Okay, inside the refreshed GV80. Now, looking at this cabin right away, you can tell that it's a nice and cozy place to be in, and that's the fact. One thing that I also have to say is that this is the area where Genesis surpassed both Lexus and Acura. The design of the dashboard is clean and simple, and at the same time, we still have a good amount of physical controls for things that require easy access. Speaking of, all the buttons and switches look great, but once you start interacting with them, they feel flimsy and not super solid, so that's one area that requires improvement. Besides that, the rest of the materials is high quality, and you truly feel like you are in a luxury product. Granted, this cabin isn't at the level of an Audi Q7 or a Volvo XC90, but like I said, it's ahead of the Japanese rivals. The technology implementation typically for a Genesis is great. We get a big 27-inch OLED display which combines your digital gauge cluster and the infotainment system, and there is also a smaller display for the HVAC system. So let's start with the gauges. They are customizable, allowing you to change their design and provide all the information you need, such as the trip computer or the driving assistance information. The infotainment has a super friendly user interface, and even though it has a lot of different menus, they are logically structured, so figuring it out shouldn't take you long. You can control the infotainment via a touchscreen or a controller in the center console, which is a much safer and intuitive solution. Overall, yeah, it's a great system, and the only downside would be no wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, so you have to plug in your device every time you want to use the phone projection. Now, the storage across the cabin is what we typically see in this segment. Not crazy and necessarily impressive, but it gets the job done. We get some space in the center console, the door pockets are okay, and the trunk offers 35 cubic feet of space, 84 cubic feet after folding the seats down. Now, the front seats are super soft and offer great overall comfort. The pseudo massage mode helps keeping you fatigue-free on longer trips, and inflatable bolsters are also a plus. Now, moving to the back, there's a good amount of space for two adults. The rear bench is adjustable in the Stop Prestige trim that we're testing, and at the end of the day, it's a midsize SUV, so it does not disappoint in that area. 3-row model is available, however, our tester only has 2 rows. Well, that was the cabin of the Genesis GV80, so let's get it on the road now and see how it drives. Okay, driving the GV80. Now, Genesis is not trying to trick you by advertising the GV80 as a performance-oriented SUV. If you want something that's fun to drive and it has to be a mid-sized SUV, check out the Acura MDX or the BMW X5. I mean, even looking at the GV80, you can tell right away that it's a vehicle that prioritizes luxury, and the fact that it's built on a rear-wheel drive platform has more of a prestigious meaning rather than a performance purpose. So, where the GV80 really excels is everyday driving and highway cruising. The cabin is super quiet. We get laminated side windows and active noise cancellation, and the suspension perfectly soaks up all the bumps and road imperfections, and you feel completely isolated from the outside world. As you should. The engine has just enough power and torque, it operates very smoothly and works well with an 8-speed automatic transmission that we have on board. The only downside of this drivetrain would be fuel economy. 16 miles per gallon in the city, 22 on a highway, and 19 combined isn't the best in this day and age, and if you compare it to the European rivals, not to mention hybrid offerings from Lexus, the Genesis is behind. Everything else though works very well. We have a good set of driver assistance systems, including semi-autonomous driving system, which, granted, isn't a full-blown hands-free driving system, and it reminds you every minute or so to put your hands back on the wheel, but it is very precise and works smoothly. So as an overall luxury product, the GV80 is a very good proposition, but is it as good as its rivals? Well, let's jump into the final thoughts and talk about it. Okay guys, let's sum up the Genesis GV80. Now let me tell you something, it still isn't as good as the German rivals, and in my eyes the BMW X5 is the best mid-size luxury SUV as an overall package, but Genesis did something right here and I would pick the GV80 over the Lexus RX or the Acura MDX. Granted, it is more expensive than Japanese offerings and it will probably cost you more to maintain down the line, but for 80 grand as tested, it is an interesting value proposition. It's very refined with great ride quality, smooth drivetrain, and only 2 things that require improvement are those controls that just feel cheap and like they don't belong here, and better fuel economy. Anyways, if you guys have any questions about the GV80, drop a comment and I'll answer them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all later.